All right, well, happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to Confirmation Week 3. We are talking about science and God. We're talking about the who and the how. I will tell you, I am loving this conversation because it is real life stuff. You're dealing with it every day. You're probably taking science class today. And the reality is sometimes people are going to divide God and science. You got to pick one or the other. And that's confusing to you. I remember being a middle school and high school kid, it was confusing to me. So my goal and DCE Nikki's goal is to bring some clarity to you, to help you understand that God and science are not enemies like the Bears and the Packers fighting for supremacy. The Bears have supremacy, by the way. But God and science are not enemies. But instead, when we start with God as our creator, that's the who, then science helps us explain the how. So instead of being combative, fighting elements, they go hand in glove. God created, and science helps us understand how he did it. We start with God as creator, then science explains how God did it. That sounds to me like it makes sense, but the reality is you might be in a science class in school today, or later on this year, or next year, or maybe in high school or in college, and they're going to look at that differently. Your teachers or professors might have you think about that differently than I'm having you think about it. And I think that can really challenge us. It can really get us thinking, what do I make of all this? Maybe it feels like there's competing voices. I remember when I was in junior high and I felt like I was the only Christian, me and one of my buddies who went to our church with, were like the only Christians who believed that God actually created the world and not science made the world. I understand that's really hard. It was hard for me as a middle school kid and high school kid. But first I want to tell you, you are not alone in believing that God created the earth. Now, remember week 1 of this series, we talked about how for hundreds of years, every major scientist was a Christian and believed that God created the world. But still today, people challenge that. And science can challenge our faith, and life can challenge our faith. Maybe you have a friend who comes from an entirely different faith background and they ask questions or think about things differently, and that challenges your faith. Or maybe something really rough happens to you in your life. Somebody that you know or love dies. And you wonder, where is God in the midst of this? And you feel like your faith gets challenged. Maybe that's happened to you in the past. Maybe that's happening right now. If that hasn't happened to you yet, you haven't feel like your faith has been challenged, let me tell you, it will. A challenge is coming. It's because faith isn't easy. Sometimes we can feel like we really believe, but then other times we kind of struggle with it. I want to tell you that that's normal. It's normal to ask questions. It's normal to struggle. And I actually want to talk about that a little today in light of our God and science conversation. It sounds weird to say it, but the Bible actually says in this world, you will have trouble. Jesus said it. In this world you will have trouble. But then he says, take heart, I, Jesus, have overcome the world. So let's talk about a story where God and science and the who and the how kind of clashed a little bit in the eyes of some. It's in John chapter 9. So if you have a Bible, maybe pause this video for just a second. Ready? Pause me. Go grab a Bible and let's open up to John chapter 9. We're going to be in John chapter 9. We're going to meet a man. And let me just give you the backstory here. He was born blind. That is, he's never seen his whole life. It's not like he had vision then lost it, but he was born without the ability to see anything. He is born blind. Jesus enters his life and completely heals him. Now, everybody knew he was blind, and then now everybody knows he can see. Now, Jesus does this, and it's visible to everybody to see. You would think, right, that when Jesus does this miraculous healing, that then everybody who sees it would say, holy cow, Jesus did this. Jesus is awesome. It's almost like you would think if you saw people in this world and they saw the Grand Canyon and beautiful oceans and beautiful mountains and lakes and giraffes and elephants, that they would say, holy cow, God is awesome. But it's like we're talking about with science. People aren't always there with us. They ask, well, how did it happen? And they don't believe that God or Jesus could actually do it. That's what happened in John chapter 9. So John chapter 9, fast forward to verse 8. So his neighbors, that is the neighbors of the blind man, and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. But he himself insisted, I am the man. How then were your eyes open? They demanded. He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it in my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. So they're questioning him. How did this possibly happen? It couldn't possibly have been Jesus. And the man's like, no, this man, Jesus, did it. So then they can't still make sense of it, this group of people. So they send this man to religious leaders. This is chapter 17. Jesus, not in the picture right now, but this healed man and the Pharisees are having a conversation. Verse 17. Finally they turned, that's the Jewish leaders, again to the blind man and said, what have you to say about him? It was your eyes that he opened. And they're talking about Jesus. The man replied, he is a prophet. That is to say, he's something special. The Jews still did not believe that he had been born blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Is this your son? They asked. Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? So they're asking the how question. They refuse to believe it, even though they can see it with their own eyes, that this blind man was now healed. They're asking the question, well, how did it possibly happen? The heat rises in the room. The conflict increases. Verse 24, a second time they summoned the man who had born blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man is a sinner. That is, they're trying to pit Jesus against God and say that Jesus, who was claiming to be God, couldn't have done this. Give glory to God because it wasn't Jesus who did it. They're trying to make a way to explain it other than Jesus. And in John chapter 9, verse 25, you get this awesome statement that this man makes. I love it. John 9:25. The man, the healed man, replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see. That is to say, everyone's asking this blind man questions like, how did it possibly happen? It couldn't have been Jesus. Was he a sinner or not? And asking all these questions. And the man finally says, listen, guys, I don't know everything there is to know about this guy, but here's what I do know. I was blind, but now I see. I can't explain all the how it got done, but I can tell you who did it. And Jesus did it. Imagine this man goes to college and is in biology class, and the biology professor is trying to explain to him that there's no way that a person who walked on earth, Jesus, could work healing. What do you think the man would say? I think the healed man would be like, listen, professor, I don't know what you're saying and what you believe, but here's what I know. I was blind, but now I see because of a man named Jesus. Bottom line, friends, science can't explain everything. Let me say that again. Science can't explain everything. It can't explain how God does everything that God does. It can't explain how a healed man can be able to see. It can't explain how God can make the world out of nothing. It can't explain all that. some of what God does is a mystery. That means it's beyond our mind. And that makes sense because God's up here and we're down here. We can't understand everything about God because, newsflash, God's a little smarter than we are. It's a mystery to us. And we can love God and have a relationship with God even if we don't understand everything about God. You see, because here's what I want you to understand today. Science wants an explanation. Faith wants a relationship. Science wants an explanation for everything, to be able to explain everything away. But faith just asks for a relationship. Science can't explain all that God does, including wanting a relationship with you. Can't explain why God would pursue you and me and forgive us. But that's who God is. He wants a relationship with us, and he'll do everything possible to bring us into life and relationship with him, even going to a cross. Science can't explain why God, who created everything, would send his son, Jesus, to live and die for us. But it's true. It's a mystery to us. Like, we can't understand everything about it, but it's true. And what Jesus did for that blind man, healing him and changing his life, he did for you and me. He took us from spiritual blindness and not being able to understand everything and being afar from God, brought us into life and relationship with him. Now, I understand maybe you don't get all that, or you're not sure what to make of all that. Maybe you are totally like a full-on believer in Jesus Christ. You get everything. Maybe you're still kind of like, yeah, I hear you, Pastor Brian, but not exactly sure about all of it. Regardless of how you feel about God, how God feels about you doesn't change and won't ever change. There's nothing you can do to make God love you anymore. There's nothing you can do to make God love you any less. Jesus has paid for everything. So, a few closing thoughts for today. You don't need to choose between God and science. You don't. You can believe in God and still say, hey, science fits under God and helps us understand God, but there's some things that we're just not going to understand. Because science wants an explanation for everything. God just wants a relationship. And it is okay to have questions about God. It is okay to ask questions about creation and how God did everything. It's somewhat hard to understand, and it's really good to be asking and searching and seeking out God and Jesus. Because the reality is, as we seek out God, he continues to lead us to himself. I'm convinced that the more we study science, with the understanding that God is the creator, the more we'll see actually how awesome God truly is. That instead of fighting against each other, the more you dig into science, you say, holy God, holy cow, God, you did an awesome job with creation. Hey, I love this conversation. It's so important. I want to encourage you now to take a look at the Google form, answer some questions, just to be thinking about this. And I wish you a great rest of your week.